Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
It's alcoholic, and everybody okay over there? I'm honored to be asked to come speak at an AA meeting and to participate in this wonderful fellowship that has saved my life and the lives of many other people. And I'm an alcoholic, and I discovered I had alcoholism after I ended up going to AA meetings. I pretty much, also I want to, celebrate the chip takers and invite John, to welcome John to the fellowship. And I also, I thought the same thing as I've heard many people say that they just thought something was wrong. It was as if, to me, everybody had the book except me. I was recently playing a gig at my mom's church, and these guys were all starting to play this song, and they were getting ready to count it off, and everybody had a book but me. And they were, and for some strange reason, everybody had just handed out the book and forgot to give me one. And it was okay because I can't read music anyway, but I would like to be able to fake it, I'd like to have the opportunity to appear, And it reminded me, when that happened, and it was no big deal, but when it happened, it reminded me of the feeling that I always kind of had, that where it seemed like everybody had the book but me in life. And I heard other speakers share that from the podium, where they felt like they'd walked into a room and everybody had this book called life, and they just showed up too late to get theirs. And I suppose I sort of felt that way a long time before I was aware of it, before I was consciously aware of it. But when I came into AA, I'm a Beverly Hills men's stag alcoholic from the Roxbury group of Alcoholics Anonymous, where I learned I was an alcoholic. And in fact, I caught alcoholism there. And I'm eternally grateful for that group of men, and not for the fellowship of AA, but that group of men at that time in my life was, it was just, it worked for me. I've always been interested, or I was always desperately afraid of not being hip, and I thought AA was fine for you guys because it was, you were square, and I was tragically hip and needed to find, it's like I needed to suffer for my art, and I needed to be, and it was okay, sobriety, but is it hip? Are people hip in sobriety? Do they, and so when I heard about the Beverly Hills men's stag, I pictured, well, there'd probably be a lot of leather jackets there, and really, it was all about, my initial motivation for getting sober was really about getting gigs, getting jobs. I'm a drummer. I've been a drummer all my life, and it has always been about performing in some way or another. And as you can perhaps some of you might relate to the fact that I came into AA, and I still today struggle to stay out of performances and out of competitions. When Casey asked me to speak, which I thank you very much, Casey, for asking me to come speak, and I am very grateful for the relationship that I've been honored to have with Casey in her sobriety and in my sobriety. And so when she asked me to speak, I immediately, my head goes into, now how can I perform? How does this, it's like this eternal contest in my brain. Like sobriety, when I was new in sobriety, it was like, well, I didn't really want to talk because I wanted to have 30 days before I talked, because I didn't want to sound unhip. You know, if I had to speak, I wanted to be profound. So I was going to need at least 30 days sober to be profound. But so the blessing of the Beverly Hills Men's Stag was they used to get you up there with about 48 hours of sobriety. And 150 guys go, okay, hip us to what's really going on there, you know. And I learned in this process that I'm okay and lovable and acceptable just as I am, warts and all. I don't have to perform. However, a large part of recovery for me has been a process of unlearning that sort of tendency to compete and perform. And so I stand here tonight in front of you guys to share with you my experience, my strength, and my hope. I really should say it's not my sobriety. It's been a gift, a wonderful gift to me, and I'm sober by the grace of God. And I found that grace by the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm here to share that with you. And so I will try my level best not to perform and to sound, to try to sound hip. But when I try to share about how it was, I go back and I hear people say all the time that they knew they were an alcoholic when they were, 5 or 6. I have a wonderful sponsor who, I think he had his first drink when he was about 4 or something like that. And he relates to this sort of unmanageability, or this obsession, this obsessive thing, way back in his childhood. And for me, it wasn't that way. Although when I look back, I can sort of see things now that weren't clear to me before. When I've been asked to speak in the time that I've been sober a few times, and it's always been difficult for me to remember how it was. And so one of the things I used to do when I asked to speak, I used to think that it was my time to do a lecture, And I quickly learned that that's not what we share from a podium in AA. However, I avoided talking about how it was because I thought that was unimportant. You don't want to hear my drunk log. I'm just going to tell you how to work the steps. And so, I got over that, thank God. This fellowship is loving and accepting even when we're not very lovable. And so I learned, I realized, I guess, that the reason I didn't share about how it was because I couldn't remember how it was. I really don't remember much about the 70s, I know it was fun, but there's huge gaps, and I used to say, well, I'm a high bottom drunk, and I suppose I am. I got to AA with my own teeth and a wristwatch, I've heard that qualifies you for a high bottom, but I realize many other people who share about much deeper bottoms, but I realize that a bottom, for me anyway, a bottom is emotional. It's where you end up, in here and in here. And where I ended up was all about how I felt about me and life. But so when I talk about how it was, it's difficult to remember, but I guess more is revealed as longer I stay sober, the more I realize that there were signs and symptoms of this disease in me pretty far back. And I'm hard pressed to say, well, if a child can't chew one piece of gum without chewing the entire pack, I'm hard pressed to to identify that as a symptom of trouble ahead. But I was way, as far back as I can remember, I would do things, if it was good, I would do it obsessively. One time, I remember having a donut route when I was a kid, and I couldn't sell all my donuts, and I had like 4 or 5 bags of donuts left. There were a half dozen bags. And it was a cold day after school, and I thought, well, I'm a little hungry, I'll have one. And I had a donut, a glazed donut, and it tasted good, and I ate my entire stash, because I couldn't sell it anyway. But I remember sitting behind my mother's trailer eating all my donuts, knowing I had to go eat dinner right after, within the next half an hour, but thinking, I'll make it, I'll just make it work, And I did. I ate, about 3 dozen donuts, and then went and had dinner. And I don't know if that's an alcoholic personality or an addictive personality, but as I look back and I see signs of my own behavior, I see where I was pretty much, waiting to happen. And also I hear people say that when they had their first drink, that they realized they were home, they had arrived, they had met their friend. And that wasn't, again, for me, it wasn't, I'm not that kind of, the style of alcoholism that I've experienced wasn't that way. I had my first drink in 1964. And oddly enough, ended up in Nogales, Mexico. But didn't consider that any part of my drinking career, I didn't see that as anything. I saw that as a choice to, my 16th birthday, to get drunk and go with some friends to Nogales. And I really don't remember drinking much for the next couple of years. And for me, like I said, I played music all my life, and it was always about the music for me. It was always, everything in life was lined up around playing gigs and playing drums, and I was always around older guys, and there would always be some guys hanging out that were real hip. Remember, these hip guys, man, I just loved being around them, and they would have things like White Cross bennies and stuff like that, and they would have better ideas than I had. My idea was to play the music, but they would come up with extra stuff to do after the music was over. And in Arizona, where I grew up, the only places that we could play were after-hours joints because we were underage. And so I cut my teeth musically in a joint that would open at 1 o'clock and close at 4 in the morning. And I remember this guy saying, well, let's go fishing, after the gig. I'll give you some of these pills and we'll go fishing. So I remember back in 64 or 65, taking uppers and going fishing. It was a very interesting experience, fishing on speed, but it didn't seem to me like an abnormal thing to do. I had no frame of reference. And so for a fair period of time, drinking really wasn't in the picture. However, odd behavior was. And I remember in that same period of time, or shortly after that, these guys would say, these White Cross bennies are hard to get a hold of, so what we'll do is we'll chop up this little inhaler, this cotton, and you eat that, and you get real wired. It's great. You get wired for about 12 hours. So, again, I had no frame of reference except for these guys were hip, and I wanted to be in the thing, so we'd eat this stuff that tasted god-awful. It was just the worst tasting thing you can imagine. And that's when I got introduced to drinking, because we had to have something to chase this stuff with. So a good carbonated wine seemed like the thing to drink with this stuff. One that would make you belch and taste this thing over and over and over and over. So playing nightclub gigs, belching up this god-awful taste, and fishing after the gig. It was all kind of this experience that for me had nothing to do with like I said, I have no frame of reference, so it had nothing to do with being outside of normal activity. For the group that I ran with, that was social activity. That's how everybody, or at least the guys I knew, the hip guys, that's how they acted. That's what they did. And for a fair period of time, I wasn't very interested in a drink. But at a certain point, in about 66, I graduated from high school, had all kinds of gigs, and it was like the green light went on, and I began to drink, and I discovered what this drink could do for me. And to this very day, it is not what alcohol does to me, it is what it does for me. It's the way it always was. What it did to me was secondary to what it did for me. It allowed me to be one of the hip guys. It allowed me to be more sophisticated. I remember drinking bourbon, which I never liked the taste of that stuff. I don't know why people drink that stuff. It tasted awful to me, but I wanted to seem hip, so I drank bourbon and ice cubes, and that was a drink I would, and I quickly learned that after 2 or 3 of them, it didn't matter what it tasted like, it went down. And so my drinking, my social drinking really just, I think, people also talk about a line that they cross over with alcohol, and again, that line for me just has never been clear. I can only remember 2 things about drinking. I can remember when I was absolutely sure I had no problem at all with drinking. And I can remember I'm absolutely sure I'm an alcoholic. And there's no way in God's world, on this earth, that I can drink and expect to live a good life, and to be able even to predict what's going to happen. And so for the 25-year period in between those 2 thoughts, it was where I crossed over that line remains kind of a mystery to me. Although I think, looking back, you could probably, it took me weeks before I was having blackouts. And so if there was a line to cross over, if blackouts have to do with that, then I probably crossed over that line really early. Probably right after the first couple of drinks, because again, I didn't have a frame of reference, and people would say to me, do you have to get so messed up? And these were guys who got real messed up. These weren't guys who didn't get loaded. These were guys who had bennies and little cotton things, and they would say, do you have to get so messed up? And I never knew how to answer that question. I mean, and I really wanted to. I really wanted to say yeah or no, and I would, like, everybody would get real loaded, and then they would accuse me of taking acid or something along with the drinks, or they would accuse me, what else did you have that we didn't have? And I had no frame of reference. I didn't know I was an alcoholic. That word had never been brought up. I mean, it didn't happen. And so I got all my information about drugs and about drinking. And I know this is an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm a blackout drinking alcoholic. But drugs have been a part of my experience in alcoholism, and so I only mention it in that context, because I know that we're alcoholics, and we're sober, and well, I'm sober and clean, but I realize that my alcoholism manifests in a lot of ways, and drug use was one of those ways. And so what I did was, having no frame of reference, I had no way of knowing whether or not whether my drinking was abnormal, except for when the other guys would say, well, do you have to get so loaded? I would struggle to answer the question, but I would think down deep inside, well, who the hell are you to ask me that question? You're the one who brought all the stuff. You're the one who bought me the drinks. I was having blackouts and being loaded way before I was 21. And these guys would ask me that question. Maybe not too many of the guys would ask me that question, but some would. And I would just resent the fact that they would bring it up. And to me, way into my recovery, I confused a resentment with a good memory. Today, I still tend to think, well, I just have a good memory. But the reality is that I am a sensitive, grandiose alcoholic. And I heard a guy a long time ago over at the Stag say, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. And that's how it works for me, because and I read it in the book. I can read it in the big book and the 12 and 12 that we're grandiose, and these shrinks talked about us way back. But to really understand that as an experience of my own has been something in recovery. And of course, I had no way of knowing that I was. My growth was stalled at about 19, but when I got sober, I realized how sensitive I can be. And people can say things to me today that I just, if I am unable to, what happens first is that my mind reacts to, my sensitive mind reacts to things people say. And if it stops there, man, I'm just running with it. And I'm convinced I have a good memory, and it's not a resentment, but I painfully remember, and it's a good memory with a lot of pain. So today I have learned to apply these steps in life, but in those situations, to step away and to realize that, to turn it over, to not dwell in this sensitivity, in this resentment for either whatever reason. It doesn't matter whether I'm right. In fact, the worst kind of anger I've experienced is the kind that I feel I have a right to. It's the worst, because I have this. I don't have one voice. I have 100 voices. They all gang up, and they all agree that I'm right about this thing, and I should do this thing. And there's that one voice in there that says, "Well, let's have a drink while we're talking about it." There's always that voice that will say, big fat line sounds like a good idea. Let's have a drink. And I'm aware of that, and I really appreciate your sharing about the feeling of having a drink, because in this fellowship we're honest about it, and that my competitive performing mind says, well, I'm a long way from a drink. By the grace of God, I've been clean and sober since July 15th, 1989. And I say that not for any other reason than to anyone who is newer than I, who feels like, who just feels like it's impossible to stay sober, or it's hard to stay sober, with a mind like mine, who at any given time will go, oh, geez, I've walked into a liquor store, which I walk into very often to buy things. It's in my neighborhood, and it's easier than actually shopping. Go into the liquor store, and there have been times when it seems as though there's like this chorus of bottles of booze doing this they hum this thing to me. And I've stood there thinking, why all of a sudden, and there's the soloists, like the scotch, the vodka, why all of a sudden does that happen? And I don't know about anybody else, but if I begin to think that I'm somehow or another immune from a drink, or because it's been a few years, and I'm a newcomer, for anyone who's, in my opinion, which is only my opinion, I'm a newcomer. I think that we're all newcomers, until about 10 years. But I feel, and I'm grateful for the fact that I'm reminded constantly by others in the fellowship, by life, that there's no cure. There's only a reprieve, a daily reprieve based on my spiritual condition, like it tells us in the book. And so that it's been, I've been very fortunate, I'm blessed that I don't often, they don't often sing to me, and it doesn't often happen, but I have steps. And I don't care if I'm standing right in front of the cash register. If I got to say a prayer, I'll say a prayer. I don't care what I got to do. I learned a long time ago to turn and walk the other direction. So in my drinking career, or at least discovering my drinking, I went in from the early blackout type of drinking experience to sort of a routine part of my life, where that I became the drunk, the guy who you could count on to get the drunkest. And I think many of us have experienced that, and we sort of like it's like getting your hip card punched, you know. You get to hang out with the guys because you get to be, you know, the most wild, you know, you'll do anything, you know. And I very slowly became, that became part of my social interaction with everything in my life. Very gradually, very, in a very subtle way. I don't think, like crossing over that line that we talk about, I think that maybe happened pretty early on, but further down the road is where it became my life. It became how I experienced life. And when I realized that I couldn't not have a drink. I'd already been drinking for, it was about 1979 or 80 when I realized that drinking did physical things for me, like get rid of the shakes, like make me feel okay. I was introduced, like most of us are at some point, to morning drinking. But I drank in blackouts. I've been blessed with good fortune and been able to play in music and be on the road and do stuff. And when you're on the road, you know, you can get drunk in every city, every night. You know, you can, you know, the only guys you have to answer to are the few that you're with. Everybody else sort of, you know. And so I drank all over the country, you know, and blacked out, and my life was, you know, I hear a lot of people say, man, it was fun. Drinking was fun. And I have to say that, you know, in balance, I would say that basically it really wasn't that much fun. It really wasn't. I mean, the bottom line was I was constantly struggling with a hangover. I was constantly embarrassed about what I might have said or didn't say, and I was constantly in this competitive performance mode. I had to play good drums, or you damn sure would have fired me from your band because I was too big a drunk. I was just too much collateral garbage that came with me, man. If I was in your band, you know, you didn't know who you had on your hands. You needed to have somebody who could, you know, maybe bail you out of jail and stuff like that. And so I was in this, the overall picture for me as I look back, it just really wasn't that much fun. And there's nothing about drinking I miss, with the exception of the escape of it all, you know. And so I drank along, miserable, you know, just an unmanageable existence. I got my first DUI in 1971 on the 101 freeway out in the valley, you know. And I didn't get another DUI until 1981, so a 10-year span of constant drinking and driving. And 1981, I got another DUI. And then in 82, I got a third DUI. All of them on the 101 freeway. So in those days, it was very clear to me what my problem was. It was the 101 freeway right between, you know, that little stretch in Sherman Oaks. And I'm telling you guys, I'd get off the 405, and I would work my way through, you know, the hills and the little routes, and take another 20 minutes to get to where I was going. But it was, you know, my responsibility to avoid that section of freeway. And I say that to you now because by the grace of God, you know, when I came into AA, I got a job based on I started off with a voluntary commitment that turned into a job in a DUI program, in several DUI programs actually. And I got to I get to be reminded of my own denial and my own struggle and my own the diminished capacity I had to honestly take a look at my own life, and by working with other people in DUI. And so I'm blessed because it helps keep me sober, and it gives me a chance to be of some service, although it's not service work because I get paid to do it. So, you know, when you're doing stuff like that, people say, well, I'm trying to give some of it back. Well, if you're working for a DUI program, you're selling it back. If you're getting paid for it, you're not giving it back. But it has service sort of qualities to it, and you get to help other people in the process. So I get to be reminded, and I think the boss knows that I needed to have some kind of gig like that to keep reminded and keep me in the place. Although one of the traps to that is that you know, it's sometimes you get burnt out and you forget about your meetings, your fellowship. I should say I forget about my meetings and the participation in this fellowship. So while I'm very grateful to have had for the last 8 years jobs in these DUI programs, and I continue to have some limited participation in these, I realize the need and the necessity, absolute necessity, for me to pull back away from that counseling kind of thing and get back into sharing in this fellowship and being of service without having any other kind of connection to it. But anyway, I came along and in the 80s, and I struggled, and I got in trouble, and one thing after another, I stopped drinking in 1985, and I thought, well, my problem is alcohol, so I'll stop drinking, and then my problems will all go away. From now on, I'll just use some cocaine and some Valiums and stuff like that, and maybe smoke some pot, and that'll be it. And then I'll be sober. And so I would share, and I went to some of my first meetings. And my very first meeting, I think, was in about 1979, and of course, it wasn't hip enough for me. And I didn't relate. I saw everybody was different instead of similar. And so as I struggled along trying to do it my way, and going to AA meetings when I first started, I was a pretty quick study on the bumper sticker slogans, so I could talk a little bit, I could say things like, I'm just doing it one day at a time, and I just keep coming back, and people say, yeah, well, you're getting the idea, I said, yeah, I tell you, it's a very uncomfortable beast sitting in an AA meeting wired on coke, it's, and my friends would go, and I'd say, okay, I'll go, but I'm not going to share. And we'd walk in the room, and the guy would go, you in the red shirt in the back, As soon as I walk in, I'd say, how do they know? How does that guy know to pick on me? Didn't realize how I looked when I walked in. So I struggled, and finally I hit that bottom. That for me was the way I felt about me when I looked in that mirror. And my heart was broken about the way my life had been turning out. And I was really at a place where I just wanted a better gig, and I wanted somebody who would sort of understand the complexness of me, So I met a guy, and we had worked together, and he said, well, meet me if you want some help, meet me over at this place. We'll have some dinner, then we'll go over to the men's stag. And I went there, and I started to explain to him my unique needs and how this was going to have to work for me in order for it to. And he said, maybe just try shutting up, and you sit down and let us talk. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to explain anything. And what you might consider is that you're addicted to out. You're an alcoholic like me. If you're an alcoholic like me, the thing is that what you want is you want out. So you don't need to reinvent yourself. Just see what you find. And so I came to my first AA meeting that night, and I can't tell you exactly what happened. And I don't know. Something happens in this process, and all I would say to someone who were new was to trust the process. Just trust it. Don't try to figure it out. And I came to the meeting as a bunch of men. They were kind of loud and raucous, and they stood up and shared. And I don't know. It's like I suddenly became aware of a different way of living. And what I noticed was that I woke up in the morning and I liked myself a little better. I was sober, and I was clean, and I wasn't trying to, I never did work with a guy who I thought I was going to get a lot of gigs from. I was convinced that if I came to AA and I showed this guy I really wanted to be sober, he'd hire me on all kinds of gigs. Never did. Never hired me once. But I'm sober by the grace of God today. I'm sober by the 12 steps of this program, which he helped me learn. And I found my sponsor the first night. This little guy standing in front of me. And he said, work the steps or I'll kill you, And I said, I thought they meant work the steps or die. And he said, no, you work the steps or I'll kill you. And it was a blessing, man. He'd show up and honk his horn outside of my apartment, honking his horn. I go, what? Just don't, And he'd call up and he'd say, I'm coming over. We're going to go get coffee. And he'd hang up. He wouldn't wait for me to say anything, And I'd get out of bed and go, shit, I gotta go have coffee with this guy. And we'd go, and he would drive from the valley. He would drive from like Studio City to Santa Monica to pick me up and take me to go get coffee for a couple hours, drop me off. And he asked me to write. Well, he didn't ask me to write. He told me to write. And he, you know, I took direction from him. I responded to him, to that. And that was all part of this fellowship. I didn't know it at the time, but what he was doing was sharing his experience and his strength and his hope with me. And I pray that I can share a little bit of that same energy. I pray that I can share my experience, my strength, and my hope with you guys as with the same, or even part of the same energy and desire and willingness and humility that the man who has sponsored me and still sponsors me today has done for me, and all the other men that have been in my life. And I would see a couple guys sitting here today have been a part of my recovery, and that I am eternally grateful for. I mean, I can't really put it into words, but to know that this fellowship is here for me, and that I pray that I might be the same, might be available and loving and accepting and willing as other men have been to me in this fellowship. And I am grateful to be clean and sober, and I wish you all a very, very happy New Year, and thanks again for sharing me.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.